Hi everyone, it's Tox from CritsHappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. Today we've got a critical review of Legacy Gears of Time. Legacy Gears of Time is from Floodgate Games. It's a 2 to 4 player game, plays in about 60 minutes, and is recommended for ages 13 and up. It's predominantly a card game. You will have cubes to keep track of a couple of different things, primarily influence, on your inventions during the game. But speaking of those inventions, the point of the game is that you're going to be a time traveler, moving throughout a time stream in different ages, primarily backwards, but more on that during gameplay. And the goal is going to be to create different inventions at different points in time to become building blocks for future, more powerful technologies and inventions that will create victory points for you. Obviously, as in most games, whoever has the most victory points is the winner. In this case, it uses time as a resource as a very interesting mechanic of how to control the continuum of all the different inventions. It sounds confusing. It is confusing. It's an easy but complex game. A simple but hard game. And it's something that does take a little bit of investment but can produce some interesting results in the back end. But let's jump into gameplay. We'll show you a little bit about moving around the time stream, and then we'll come back and we'll give you our final thoughts. For now, let's grab our time traveling boots, let's get ready to invent fire, let's get ready to invent the wheel, and jump in to Legacy Gears of Time. Okay, so Legacy Gears of Time. Legacy is a simple, easy, hard, complex game to get down. And the game design itself actually lends itself to that, which I can talk a little bit more about my final opinions. But I'm going to show you a 2-player setup. The only difference between a 3 and a 4-player setup is where you begin the game in terms of all the time frames and how many time frames are going to be available. In a 2-player game, there's going to be 4 to start the game. In a 3-player, there's 5, and in a 4-player, there's 6. More time frames equals more space for inventions to be created. Now, each game has 4 rounds, and each round, each player takes 4 turns. So, in a 2-player game, white will go, yellow will go, we'll move this forward. White will go, yellow will go, we'll move it forward. Same thing again, and then at the end, it'll come back and we'll move forward 1 round and we'll begin to score. One of the mistakes that I made playing this game was I was actually scoring at the end of each turn and not the end of each round. That was really bad. So, to start the game, each player is going to get a character. The characters are very uniquely colorful and creative, although the theme doesn't really connect. And we'll get a little bit more on that in the end of the gameplay. But once you pick a character, the real primary thing you're going to look at is the back. So this character, Maggie and Sam, has a bonus for law. If Maggie and Sam own law and influence law, they're going to get 2 additional points when scored. This character, Dr. Tilton, will get 3 for advanced sciences. This number in the crown, and you'll see that throughout different cards in the game, that represents the number of victory points scored when you do the scoring at the end of a round. Now, on your turn, you're going to be able to do 3 different actions. And you can choose from traveling to the past to any time frame, establishing a technology in the time frame you're in, influencing an existing technology, which will generally happen after the first round of scoring, and then drawing cards from the top of the draw pile. In this game, there is a common draw pile that everyone is going to take from, and a common discard pile, which it should be noted is going to be discarded face down. And then finally, there are things called fate cards, which are free actions that you can play at any time on your turn. Now, one thing to note about Legacy Gears of Time is all the action takes place down here. While there's a score track and turn markers, and you're going to be moving your people around on the different time frames on the board, the crux of the game are the inventions that you'll be placing down here. So as you could imagine, if I place a card, for instance, right here, the person sitting on that side of the table kind of gets screwed because they can't read everything upside down unless they're really good like that. This is a game that's really best played with people arcing around the board or surrounding it from sides in the front, because all of the cards are going to be placed out down here. The other thing too is you can get a lot of cards in these columns or in these time frames, so it can take up quite a bit of space, almost an obscene amount of space in some cases. But essentially what you can do on your turn, let's take a turn with the white player for example. So the white player has a fate card called Willed into Existence, which says remove a single dependency from any technology. Well, what's a dependency? That's a great question. Let's look at his next card, Printing Press. Printing Press, the gear shows that it costs 2 to create. It will reward 4 victory points when scored. But you'll notice in its text box it says writing and 2 with a black crown. That is a dependency. So if Printing Press were in play, I could use Will into Existence to remove writing as a prerequisite, and it would be a successful technology. Now success is only determined when you score, so not when it's played. So in addition they have another fate card which is really powerful because there's very few in the game, and it's called Time Folds Around Us. Move a player back or forward 1 time frame. Extremely, extremely powerful card. Because if you notice, one of the actions I told you could do is travel to the past any number of time frames. That means I could go back to time frame 3 and create a technology here. But for the rest of that round, I can no longer move to time frame 2 or time frame 1 unless I have something like this, which moves a player back or forward in the time frame. This can also be used against your opponent to move them into a time frame further back or further ahead than what their plans were. Then we have the Analytical Engine. The Analytical Engine also costs 2. It will reward 7, but you can see it has 3 major dependencies: electricity, logic, and printing press. Now you may be asking, why is there a black crown on those? There's a black crown on those because whoever owns or influences that technology will receive those victory points when it is used as a building block for this analytical engine. A little bit more on that during the scoring phase. You'll also notice that writing is listed under printing press, but it does not have a crown next to it. That's because writing is a prerequisite for the printing press to exist, but no one will score points on writing. The only person that will score points is the person that owns printing press. And then we have logic, which is a fundamental technology, which does not have any prerequisites. It too costs 2, but it will only provide 2 in terms of victory points. And then we have Advanced Sciences, which has the prerequisite of Basic Sciences, only costs 1 and costs 2 to be able to, or has 2 when you're scoring. So let's say, for example, keeping it simple, that the gray player wanted to move back to time 3 as their first action. They wanted to establish logic as their second action. Now, the cost is paid not in cubes, but in cards. So I'm going to discard Advanced Sciences and the Analytical Engine as 2 cards. It does not matter which 2, you could use fake cards, you could use anything you want, but I have to discard 2 cards. Now, in addition, once I've discarded those cards and established this technology, I take cubes from my general supply equal to the number of its cost and place that on here. So this shows that I have 2 influence and I am the influencer of logic. Then as my third action, let's say I want to get some more cards, I'm going to draw 2 cards from the top of the deck and I must get rid of one of them. So I'm going to keep the combustion engine and I'm going to get rid of cartography. And again, these are all discarded face down, so your opponents have no idea what you've used to establish the technology and no idea what you discarded when you chose to draw new cards. Now that would be the end of my first turn as the gray player. Now the yellow player would go and look at their hand. They have philosophy, telescope, agriculture, basic tools, also logic, and basic sciences. Let's say that the yellow player wanted to establish logic themselves. Well, they can trump the gray player. They could choose to go back in time to the 4th time frame as their first action. They could play logic on their own as a second action. They could discard 2 cards for the cost of logic, take 2 cubes from their general supply, and place that onto logic there. So you'll notice now we have logic invented in the 4th time frame and logic invented in the 3rd time frame. Then as their 3rd action, we'll go ahead and we'll draw 2 cards, getting flight and the wheel, and we'll go ahead and get rid of flight and discard that. That would be the end of each player's first turn. So we would go ahead and move that 1 move forward. We would then go and have that again, move it forward, again, move it forward, and get further on into the scoring phase at the end of the round. Now, the challenge with Legacy is that, as you'll see, you only move backwards. So the yellow player is stuck in time frame 4. They cannot move forward because they don't have any cards to move them forward. Whereas the gray player knows that they can move forward or backwards. Now, one of the interesting things is that when you get down to scoring, that's where it really matters. Because in this case, logic is created here, and we go from left to right. So this logic would fail. And the book tells you to actually turn them this way to show that they've failed. This is one of the challenges because, as you can imagine, when you get cards out here, you're going to have cards overlapping each other. So we tend to use a token of some type to show that they've failed. The game comes with these 50 tokens whenever someone crosses 50 on the scoring track, so we'll generally use those. Can be a little confusing, so you could use gems or things like that. But there's a big difference because for every technology that is successful when it's scored, you're going to get victory points and move up the victory point track. You're also going to take 1 cube off of that and put it onto your player card to be used as an influence cube later, not as a cube from your general supply. Whereas cubes from failed technologies will go back to your general supply. Now, why is that a big difference? Well, let's explain. Let's get a couple of more cards out here and show. Let's say we had printing press out here, and let's say we had the wheel out here, and agriculture out here, and basic tools out here. All these different things, right? Let's say we had the microscope, and these don't necessarily all go together. But let's say, for example, I wanted to influence and control the printing press. If I'm starting on my starting player marker and it's the beginning of a turn, if I have an influence cube and there are no cubes on this, I can move back into that time frame, and as an action I can take a cube and put a cube on it. And at the end of the round, whoever has the most influence cubes on a technology is going to influence it and own it and score the points for it. But more importantly, not just score the points for it, score the points for any additional technologies that are successful towards the right that have that as a prerequisite. So, it sounds complex, it is complex, but once you get playing, it actually becomes quite easy if you think about it in this mindset. This is a game of reverse engineering. You want to make sure that you don't go too far back in time, creating technologies that won't allow you to move forward in time to create future technologies and score when the round's over. So you're going to be taking your time to move back maybe 1 or 2 and put out technologies that you know have prerequisites to then later in another turn of the same round move back a little further and lay down those prerequisites. So that's Legacy Gears of Time. Well, let's look at all the different things because this is a big, complex, meaty type game. So first off, component-wise, the components are really, really good. The artwork is the first thing that stood out to me. I personally really like it, although we have played this with some who didn't. It is a very unique style. It very much reminded me of Ascension and Eric Sabi's type of artwork. But it's eclectic, it's different, it's wonky, I guess if that's a word, but it fits the theme very well. I was actually thinking this was more of a steampunk game going into it, and I realized that it's not. It's completely about time travel and inventions we all know. Fire, printing press, internet, space flight, things like that. But it does it in a way that is a little more whimsical, I guess is the way to say it. Component-wise though, the cards are great. They're really good quality. We've shuffled them tons of times and no issues whatsoever. They have a really nice veneer, really nice sheen on them. And the components from a cardboard perspective, these little pieces, There can be some damaging on the tips of these extra timepieces. One of the things we didn't show you throughout the gameplay is that as a round ends, you move the starting timepiece forward, you move the time track forward, and you're going to add another time frame onto that list, or that length. But they tend to, because they're very pointed, they tend to get a little bit beat up. Not too bad as long as you're careful with it. And of course the wooden cubes are cubes. The gearples, or the gear meeples, are a really nice little touch. I wish that they had done a little more with that, and had some specific ones for determining turn order and specific ones for the score track. The score track was also a little weird. The board's beautiful, but unfortunately most of the action takes place below the board. But the score track is just boxes, and it's rows of blank to 10, blank to 20, blank to 30. I wish that there had been numbers in here. I know that's minuscule and probably nitpicky, but it's just a graphic. Just put a number on there. I really wish that would have happened. Another thing, the characters. The characters are basic. You know, Chewie, for example, has a small story on the front about his true love and why he's in the game. And he has, of course, like everyone else, a invention that will give him bonus points if he is the influencer on it. But really the back of the card was what we were looking at. The front of the card with the artwork and the story didn't really impact the game that much. And I thought that there could have been something a little more with that. Now, there's a lot added in the expansion. There is an expansion for this called Forbidden Machines, but I don't want to get into that too deeply because there are some things that will affect the gameplay. We're just here talking about the base set for this. The other thing that was really, well, let's get into the gameplay because that's really where we're going right now. Component-wise, really, really good components. But from a gameplay, there's a lot of things that were good, a lot of things that were challenging, and all in between. The first thing is the rule book. The rule book could have been a little better than what it is. I think it's good. I've definitely seen much worse in my life. But there's a lot of things that I didn't understand from the rule book. And a lot of things that, quite frankly, I had to go ask other people who played the game, or I had to go and find on my own by looking at videos on YouTube and other reviewers' channels and seeing the intricacies of how things actually worked. It's not an overly complex game from a rules perspective. There's just some very important things about when you score, what you do, how you use, that are just one lines mentioned and not really elaborated on. I really, really wish that there would have been something more deep about that. Gameplay-wise, here's some things that were really kind of wonky for me. You have a general supply of cubes, and then you have a supply of influence cubes. And I get that these are from general, they go on the inventions you influence, you take one off and put them on your influence set or influence pool and use those to influence cards later on. Two things I didn't mention in gameplay. If a technology's failed, all of the cubes come off of it, not just one as I had shown in moving things around. And the other thing is that the cubes are hard to kind of keep track of. And what I mean by that is, so let's say I was influencing logic, I take a cube off and I put it on here. Most people put their influence cubes on their character's card. I think it could have been really neat had they taken one side of the card, because there's a lot of space on it, and put down one side general supply and one side influence, and then when the card's in front of you, you keep your cubes on either side of you. Since most of the action's taking place out here, I think that really could have been something simple and easy to differentiate that. But teaching the concept of general supply versus influence pool to new players was a little bit of a challenge. The other thing from a cube perspective, I'd mentioned about when you take your influence off and put it onto a technology. You can do that with any technology. It doesn't matter if it's something that has cubes on it or doesn't have cubes on it. The goal is to have the most cubes on it. So in a 4-player game, I could have 1, you could have 3, they could have 4, and this guy could have 9, and that's the guy who's going to end up influencing it. The trick is making sure that you don't put yourself in a position where what you've influenced and control now, somebody else can come in behind you and influence it greater, and they gain control of it later. Now that leads us into the experience. From an experience standpoint, while the gameplay works and the mechanics of the time works, and I love, absolutely love, that you can only go backwards and you can't go forwards. It really makes your decisions very, very important. There's a lot of engagement. You are just 100% locked in on this game when you're playing it to see what other players are playing. Because you only have 3 actions, you can't move, create, and keep doing that. You move and create and then maybe draw or do other things, and you're always looking at what your opponents are doing to plan your next move. You have an idea of what you want to do. You have a plan of what you want to do, but their movements through the time frames, their decisions to create or influence technologies are going to change and amend your plans, and that really keeps you glued to the game. So there's not a lot of downtime whatsoever in the game. There is, however, a lot of analytics. And this is where I feel this game will not appeal to a lot of people, or a lot of people of one type, I mean. This is a game where you're going to look at something way up here that's like the internet or space flight or railroads or something that has a lot of dependencies. And you're going to have all those dependencies out in the game. And you're going to have different types of influence, and you're going to see the chain or the connection points between them. And you're going to start to say to yourself, okay, if I influence this and I get 10 points for it, and I influence this and this piece, but you as my opponent influence this and this piece, you're going to get this many points, I'm going to get this many points, unless I move back and influence this, then I'm going to gain that many and you're going to gain this many. There's a lot of analytical interaction and a lot of thinking. It is very much a reverse engineer type game. And if you think in that type of mind frame, it's going to be a lot of fun. But if you're not the type of person who wants to sit down and analyze and try to decipher what the best, most efficient way is to do that, and you're not really someone who wants to take 5-10 minutes per turn to really figure out how that goes, it can really kind of draw out the game and get a little annoying. Especially if you play this game with somebody who is engineeringly mindset, and I'll just leave it at that. There's somebody in my play group who I love to death who is a critical thinker, and his moves would take quite a while. They were great, but that leads me to another point. While the game says it takes 60 minutes, it really takes about 90 minutes. New players can take a little bit longer. There's just a lot of thinking that has to happen. But because of that, what we found is this. If you're an experienced player of this game and you understand the connections and you understand the logic trees and you understand the rules, you can get ahead really quick. And especially against a new player or someone who's not as familiar with this setup and the cards and the rules and things like that. The problem becomes this. This is a very hard game to play catch up in. This is a game that everyone has the same amount of actions, and while the influence will change because of the inventions you create, there are a lot of times where somebody is ahead of the game 10, 15, 20 points, and it is very, very, very hard to catch up to them. We had some games in our 4-player games where the highest score and the lowest score were different by more than 50 points. And it's pretty amazing how far out somebody who's experienced can get. That makes teaching this game really hard because you need to throttle back a little bit and let people understand what it is and what the connection points are that will get them the maximum number of points. And me personally, I don't like teaching games to people where I'm like, look, I just scored 75 points in one turn, you loser. I'm just not like that. I really like to, that was a really bad accent, I really like to get to where they see it. I like to see them make the connections. So, where does this all lead us? Well, it leads us to this. It's a hit of a game. It's almost a crit of a game. There's a lot of things that I think hold it back from being a crit of a game. But that said, there's a lot of things that I've seen inside of Forbidden Machines that are really going to expand on Legacy. I'm really excited about that. That Kickstarter just finished a couple of weeks ago and it was very successful. This is a very fun game. It is a very thinking man's game. This is not a game you want to sit down with when you're drinking a lot. It is a game that you want to sit down and you want to be able to put some thought into it. Because the ties that bind us through all these different time frames is what's going to lead you to success. We hope that you enjoyed this review. We want to thank Ben and Floodgate Games. They were nice enough to provide us a copy of this game to review for you. We've had a blast playing it. We hope that you do too. Let us know your thoughts. Feel free to leave your comments here on the YouTube channel. Of course, you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, and at our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, we hope that you enjoy all of your time traveling adventures inside of Legacy Gears of Time. Thanks so much for watching. Keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.